Before diving into all the blueprints, I thought it might be useful just to look at the component parts that build this project. So we are using the game instance. So assuming that you've followed the playlist, you would have seen how to create a game instance and also to create a blueprint function library to call the game instance. Now, I'll go over the details of the blueprints on a kind of component by component part after this overview, so we'll come back to the detail. So with the game instance, that's one component part. So looking at the HUD data viz slider, I've just got a graphic in the background that just gives me some visual fluff. I've got a few checkboxes here. This one controls whether or not the live feed should come in. This checkbox here toggles between whether it's a bar chart or a spline graph. And this one changes the texture material on the columns. And this one applies a world-aligned texture to the columns. Now the two sliders, I've just got one which controls the months when it's not in live mode. No, actually, it still works with live mode. And this was a slider that I just used to give me a sense of how far I could push the tangents because I couldn't preview it. So I've just added it in there as a kind of way of affecting the visualization of the spline graph. So they're all the kind of elements. And again, we'll come into the blueprints in a separate video. I have a DataViz setup blueprint, which is just an actor that is purely data actor. So I always set that just to the origin. And then if we look into that, there's nothing in there. There are no components, but it is doing a lot of the heavy lifting and calculations, and we'll go into that again in greater depth. So the main actor is the hex column, and the hex column is a single actor which has a few components in it. So you will see that we have a column which I've currently set to a Z height of 0.1, therefore it's 0 in terms of a value that's attributed to it, because we're affecting the Z scale by the data we're pulling in from the Google Sheet to determine the height of the bar. I then have a preview highlight, which is a hexagon as well. And this is the geometry that moves up and down and offsets based on the data that is being previewed from the next selected month. I have a highlight sphere, which is part of that, a child of that preview highlight mesh, and therefore moves with it. I also have, which you can't quite see here because again it is zeroed out in the scale, there is, well, let me just turn that to 1 for the moment so you can see it. So I have a cylinder that has a panning material on it that is scaled based on the height. So these are all transformed based on the data that's being pulled in. Now I just had a debug bit of text that was giving me the column number just when I was doing some debugging. I've turned that off, and I have got a ground sphere, which is this sort of panning material applied to standard sphere that just gives me the appearance of a animated dome. These are not being scaled at the moment, but again I could affect the diameter of that sphere and actually make the domes different sizes depending on if there was a larger catchment area. So again, that can be dynamic. It isn't at the moment. And then I have a ground sphere that is part of the actor which aligns with the floor basically, so that it looks like there's a half dome coming out the floor. So those are the elements. The one thing to bear in mind is that the panning line that's part of the preview, I've actually got it facing down, so it's a child of the hexagon, but as it grows, when I'm affecting that value, I'm actually scaling it down. Just always means that I've got it working now in terms of the maths, but it just meant that it would always be part of the highlight mesh and be aligned to that highlight mesh. Now, my highlight mesh and the column mesh, I didn't have the pivot in the middle, so I have offset that within the blueprints again. So ideally I would have brought those in and made sure that the pivot was in the middle, but I didn't do that for some reason. So let me just clear that out. So look, what we'll do is, I'll just give you a little preview of the event graph there. So again, we'll look at that and how all of those 4 blueprints really, the game instance, the HUD, the setup, and then the hex column all communicate. And of course we have our Spline tool, which is an actor which literally just has a Spline component in it. It has nothing in the construction script and nothing in the event graph. So all of the creation of that spline is actually handled here in that setup blueprint. I've got a whole section here which is the spline option related blueprint script, which we will go over. So hopefully that's of use. If these videos are giving you some value, then please do like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. So thank you for your support.
Live long and prosper.